After my wife had an affair with my boss, she demanded half of everything I worked hard to build in the divorce. When I first met Sarah, I thought I'd found the love of my life. We were inseparable, building a life together that felt solid and unshakable. But as the years passed, the cracks in our relationship began to show. I attributed them to the natural wear and tear of marriage, stress at work, the demands of life, but I never suspected there was something deeper. Then, one evening, as I came home early from work, I found a familiar car in our driveway. My boss's. The sight of Sarah's hurried attempts to fix her hair, and my boss's sheepish look as he left was enough to confirm my worst fears. She didn't even bother to deny it. "It just happened," she said, as if that absolved her of the betrayal. The woman I'd trusted completely had been unfaithful, and not just with anyone but with someone I had to face every day at work. The humiliation was unbearable. Over the next few weeks, my life turned upside down. I moved into the guest bedroom, unable to share the same space with her. We communicated only when absolutely necessary. All the while she seemed indifferent, even defensive, about her actions. My trust was shattered, but worse than that, I could feel the beginning of something much darker brewing: her determination to make me the villain in the story. I thought I'd have more time to figure things out. But Sarah was ahead of me. A month after her affair came to light, I was served divorce papers. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of legal jargon, my mind racing. The words felt like knives, irreconcilable differences. She was initiating the divorce, as if I were the one who had wronged her. Her demands were outrageous. She wanted half of everything: our home, my savings, even part of my retirement fund. It didn't matter that I'd worked overtime for years to give us a comfortable life. She argued that she had sacrificed her career to support mine. The irony was infuriating, considering she'd found plenty of time to sleep with my boss while I was working those long hours. I felt cornered and betrayed. My friends advised me to lawyer up immediately, warning me that this could get ugly fast. I realized they were right. Sarah wasn't just looking for a clean break, she wanted to walk away with as much as she could carry, leaving me to deal with the aftermath. Determined not to let her walk all over me, I hired the best divorce attorney I could afford. Samantha was sharp, no nonsense, and reassuring in a way that made me feel like I had a fighting chance. She combed through the details of my financials, asking questions about everything from my investments to the mortgage payments. Sarah had underestimated me, thinking I'd simply roll over and accept her terms. But Samantha was quick to point out the glaring inconsistency in her demands. For starters, Sarah had been financially supported by me throughout our marriage. The house, the cars, the vacations, all of it had come from my hard work. And then there was the affair, which Samantha believed could work in my favor if proven in court. I started documenting everything. Emails, text messages, even receipts that might paint a clearer picture of our financial contributions. It felt invasive and exhausting, but I knew it was necessary. Sarah wasn't just fighting for half, she was fighting to leave me with nothing, and I wasn't going to let that happen. My boss, Richard, was no stranger to scandal, but this one hit closer to home. I debated confronting him outright but decided against it. Instead, I let my attorney handle the situation. Samantha suggested we subpoena Richard to testify about the affair if Sarah tried to deny it in court. His involvement could potentially shift the division of assets in my favor. Richard, predictably, tried to brush off the situation when I saw him at work. "It's nothing personal, man," he said, as if his betrayal was a minor inconvenience. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at his audacity. It wasn't personal. He'd not only jeopardized my marriage but also my career, given how awkward our working relationship had become. Meanwhile, Sarah remained unapologetic. She continued to act as if I were overreacting, downplaying the affair and focusing on what she felt she deserved. I realized that in her mind, she'd already justified her actions. She saw herself as a victim in a marriage that had failed to meet her expectations, conveniently ignoring her own role in its demise. The day of our first court hearing arrived faster than I'd expected. Sarah showed up looking polished and confident, while I felt a mix of anxiety and anger bubbling under the surface. Her attorney laid out her demands, painting a picture of a devoted wife who had given up her career to support her husband's ambitions. Samantha countered with a detailed breakdown of our finances, highlighting the imbalance in our contributions. She also hinted at the affair without revealing too much, saving that bombshell for later. Sarah's attorney seemed caught off guard, and I could see the first cracks in their strategy. The judge ordered us to attend mediation before proceeding further, a small victory for me. It would give us time to gather more evidence and potentially reach a fairer settlement. But as we left the courtroom, Sarah glared at me, her expression a mix of frustration and defiance. This was only the beginning. and I knew the worst was yet to come. Mediation was supposed to be a chance to negotiate, but it felt more like a battleground. Sarah entered the room with her lawyer, armed with an air of entitlement that made my blood boil. The mediator, a middle-aged man with a calming voice, tried to set the tone by reminding us to focus on compromise. But Sarah wasn't interested in compromise. She opened by demanding half the house, half my retirement, and an absurd amount of alimony. I sacrificed my prime earning years for him, she argued. It took everything in me not to respond with the words burning on my tongue, "You sacrificed nothing but my trust." Samantha remained calm, countering each demand with facts and evidence. She pointed out that Sarah had no financial obligations during our marriage and had, in fact, benefited from my income far more than she let on. Despite Samantha's steady defense, mediation was a stalemate. Sarah refused to budge, her lawyer backing her every step of the way. It became clear that this was less about fairness and more about punishment. She wanted to make me pay not just financially but emotionally. As we walked out of the session, Samantha reassured me. "They're overplaying their hand," she said. "This will backfire in court." One of the turning points came when Samantha revealed the evidence we had collected about Sarah's affair. Through careful investigation, we obtained screenshots of text messages between Sarah and Richard. Their conversations weren't just incriminating, they painted a picture of two people who had conspired against me, discussing their plans to keep the affair under wraps. When Samantha presented the evidence to Sarah's attorney, it was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Sarah's smug demeanor faltered for the first time. Her lawyer demanded to know how we had obtained the messages, but Samantha was prepared. Everything had been collected legally, either through shared accounts or information Sarah herself had left unsecured. The affair wasn't just a moral failing, it had legal implications. Adultery could influence the division of assets, and Samantha was determined to use that to my advantage. Sarah's lawyer looked visibly shaken, likely realizing they had underestimated how far we were willing to go to protect what was rightfully mine. Subpoenaing Richard was a risky move, but it was necessary. Samantha wanted him to testify about the affair, and his involvement would add weight to our case. When Richard received the subpoena, he tried to intimidate me at work, pulling me into his office and demanding to know why I was dragging him into the mess. "You brought this on yourself," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "You don't get to destroy my marriage and walk away unscathed." Richard's bravado crumbled, and he muttered something about lawyers and confidentiality agreements. I walked out of his office with my head held high, knowing I'd stood my ground. Richard's testimony, or lack thereof, would be critical. If he admitted to the affair, it would strengthen my case. If he tried to deny it, Samantha could easily discredit him with the evidence we had. Either way, his presence in court was a liability for Sarah, and that realization seemed to be hitting her hard. As the legal proceedings dragged on, Samantha suggested a forensic accountant to audit our financial history. It was a costly step but a necessary one. The accountant covered several questionable transactions, including lavish purchases Sarah had made without my knowledge. Designer bags, jewelry, and even spa trips, none of which she had mentioned during mediation. It became clear that Sarah had been spending beyond her means, relying on my income to support her lifestyle while claiming she had no resources of her own. Samantha brought this up in court, highlighting the disparity between her claims of financial hardship and her actual spending habits. The judge didn't seem impressed by Sarah's attempts to justify the expenses. The audit also revealed that Sarah had funneled small amounts of money into a private account over the years, an account she hadn't disclosed during the divorce proceedings. This revelation added another layer to the betrayal, proving that she had been planning for this eventuality long before the affair came to light. After months of legal battles, depositions, and sleepless nights, I began to see a glimmer of hope. Samantha's strategy was paying off, and the court seemed increasingly skeptical of Sarah's narrative. The affair, the hidden account, and the audit results painted a picture of someone who had manipulated the system for her own gain. During one of our final hearings, the judge suggested a settlement that was far more reasonable than Sarah's original demands. She would still get a portion of our assets, but it was significantly less than half. The house would remain mine, as would the bulk of my retirement fund. Sarah looked furious, but there was little she could do. It wasn't a complete victory. I'd lost years of my life to someone who ultimately didn't value me, but it was a step toward reclaiming my future. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I felt lighter than I had in months. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time I believed I could win. After the judge's suggestion for a fairer settlement, Sarah became more vindictive than ever. It was as if the court's decision to side with logic had only fueled her anger. She began to weaponize her words, spreading rumors among mutual friends, and even within my workplace. He's hiding assets, she claimed to anyone who would listen. The gossip reached me through a mutual friend, Lisa, who called to ask if I was all right. Sarah had told her that I was a controlling husband who had left her no choice but to seek solace elsewhere. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. Sarah wasn't just attacking me in court, she was rewriting the narrative of our entire relationship to paint herself as the victim. But Samantha was prepared. She advised me to remain silent and let our actions in court speak louder than Sarah's accusations. She's digging her own grave, Samantha said. And she was right. The more Sarah tried to smear me publicly, the less credible she appeared in the courtroom. When Richard finally took the stand for his deposition, I could see the tension in his face. He was clearly uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Under oath, he admitted to the affair, though he tried to downplay it. It wasn't serious, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Samantha didn't let him off the hook. She pressed him about the timeline, the details, and whether Sarah had ever confided in him about her plans for the divorce. Richard fumbled through his answers, revealing just enough to confirm what we already knew: the affair had been going on for months before I found out, and Sarah had openly discussed how she believed she deserved more from our marriage. His testimony was a turning point. The judge was visibly displeased, especially when Samantha presented the text messages where Sarah and Richard joked about keeping the affair secret. It was clear that this wasn't just an unfortunate mistake, it was a calculated betrayal. As the case progressed, Samantha introduced a surprise witness, Sarah's former friend, Amanda. I hadn't spoken to Amanda in years, but she had reached out to Samantha after hearing about the divorce. Amanda had fallen out with Sarah over a financial dispute, and she had no problem spilling the tea about her former friend's behavior. Amanda testified that Sarah had been planning to leave me for a long time, even before the affair began. She told me she wanted to cash out of the marriage, Amanda said bluntly. She revealed that Sarah had been consulting divorce attorneys in secret and had started moving money into a private account years ago. This testimony was a bombshell. It dismantled Sarah's narrative that she was blindsided by the divorce and struggling to make ends meet. It also highlighted her manipulative tendencies, painting a picture of someone who had been scheming behind the scenes while pretending to be a devoted wife. The pressure seemed to finally get to Sarah. During one of the hearings, she lost her composure completely. As Samantha calmly presented the evidence of her hidden account, Sarah stood up and shouted, "He's making me look like the bad guy. This isn't fair." The judge ordered her to sit down, but the damage was done. Her outburst only reinforced the image of someone who was unwilling to take responsibility for her actions. Samantha later told me that such moments, while uncomfortable, often worked in our favor. Judges don't like drama, she explained. It makes her look unstable. After the hearing, Sarah cornered me in the hallway, her face red with anger. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed. This isn't over, but her threats felt hollow. For the first time, I saw her desperation clearly, and it gave me the strength to keep pushing forward. The judge ordered one last attempt at mediation before making a final ruling. By this point, the court had seen enough evidence to know that Sarah's demands were unrealistic. She seemed to sense that her position was crumbling, but she still refused to back down entirely. This time, Samantha laid everything out on the table. She highlighted the hidden account, the affair, and the financial audit that showed Sarah had been spending recklessly for years. "We're not here to punish anyone," Samantha said, her voice steady. "We're here to ensure a fair division of assets, and the evidence speaks for itself." Sarah's lawyer tried to salvage what they could, proposing a settlement that was far closer to what Samantha had initially suggested months ago. It wasn't ideal, but it was a significant improvement from Sarah's original demands. I agreed to the terms reluctantly, knowing that dragging the case out further would only cost more time and money. When the judge handed down the final ruling, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The settlement was fairer than I could have hoped for. Sarah received a modest portion of our shared assets, but not the extravagant half she had demanded. The house remained mine, as did the majority of my retirement savings. The judge also denied Sarah's request for alimony, citing her financial independence and the evidence of her hidden account. "Both parties are capable of supporting themselves," the judge said firmly. Sarah looked stunned, as if she had expected a different outcome despite everything that had come to light. Walking out of the courtroom that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The battle was finally over, and while I wasn't walking away unscathed, I still had enough to rebuild my life. More importantly, I had my integrity, and that was something Sarah could never take from me. Walking back into my house after the final ruling felt surreal. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but it was mine. The place that once felt like a battlefield now held the promise of peace. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to fight to defend what was mine. The first thing I did was box up Sarah's remaining belongings. It wasn't out of spite, I just wanted to reclaim the space as my own. I donated most of her items to charity, finding a sense of closure in letting them go. Each box I carried out the door felt like another step towards starting over. But moving forward wasn't easy. The scars of betrayal lingered, and I found myself replaying every argument, every moment of doubt, wondering how I had missed the signs. Therapy became my refuge, helping me process the anger and guilt I carried. My therapist reminded me that the betrayal was not my failure, but Sarah's choice. Slowly, I began to believe it. Richard's involvement in the affair had left a permanent stain on my workplace. While I had initially avoided confrontation, the tension between us became unbearable. Every interaction with him felt like a reminder of what I had lost. Eventually, I decided to report the situation to HR. To my surprise, the HR department took the matter seriously. While Richard's personal life wasn't directly tied to his job performance, the ethical implications of his actions couldn't be ignored. A quiet investigation was launched, and within a few weeks, Richard was asked to step down from his position. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. His departure created an opportunity for me to step into a leadership role, something I had been working toward for years. Ironically, the man who had tried to destroy my life had inadvertently cleared the path for me to rebuild it. With the divorce behind me and a promotion at work, I began to establish a new routine. Mornings were no longer rushed or filled with awkward silences. I started going for runs before work, clearing my head and focusing on the day ahead. Evenings were spent cooking meals for one simple, but fulfilling in a way I hadn't felt in years. Friends who had distanced themselves during the drama began to reach out again. Lisa, the mutual friend who had stuck by me, became a frequent visitor. We'd sit on the porch, drinking coffee and talking about anything but the divorce. She reminded me that I still had a support system, even when it felt like the world had turned against me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for myself. No more compromises, no more walking on eggshells. The freedom was intoxicating, and with it came the realization that life after Sarah could be better than anything I'd known before. Just as I was beginning to feel like I had turned a corner, Sarah found a way to disrupt my peace. She began posting cryptic messages on social media, alluding to toxic relationships and starting over after betrayal. While she never mentioned me by name, the implication was clear. At first I ignored it, unwilling to engage in her petty games. But as the posts grew more pointed, mutual friends started sending me screenshots. Sarah's narrative had shifted now. She was the victim of a controlling, unfaithful husband who had left her with nothing. It was a blatant lie. But some people seemed to believe her. Samantha advised me to let it go, reminding me that the legal battle was over and I had nothing to prove. Her words can't hurt you anymore, she said. And she was right. The more I focused on my own life, the less power Sarah's lies held over me. Eventually, her posts stopped, replaced by selfies and vague declarations about new beginnings. Months later, I received a surprising email from Richard. It was short, almost painfully awkward, but it was an apology nonetheless. He admitted that he had made a mistake and expressed regret for the pain he had caused. I don't expect forgiveness, he wrote, but I needed to say I'm sorry. I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, his words came far too late to undo the damage. On the other, they offered a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. I didn't respond, choosing instead to let his apology exist as a moment of accountability, however small. Sarah, of course, never apologized. But by then, I no longer expected one. Her silence spoke volumes, and I was content to leave her and the chaos she had caused in the past. As I moved further away from the shadows of my divorce, I found myself wanting to share my story not out of spite, but as a way to process what I had been through, and perhaps help others in similar situations. I started writing anonymously on forums like Reddit, detailing the lessons I had learned about trust, boundaries, and self-worth. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who had experienced their own betrayals, thanking me for giving them a voice. Sharing my story became a form of therapy, helping me make sense of the chaos and turn it into something meaningful. It was through these posts that I realized how far I had come. The man who had once felt broken and lost was now stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Reconnecting with old friends and family became a priority. During my marriage, Sarah's controlling tendencies had caused rifts that I hadn't fully acknowledged. Now, I was determined to mend those relationships. One evening, I invited my brother and his family over for dinner. It was the first time I had seen them in years without Sarah's presence looming over us. We laughed, reminisced, and talked late into the night, and I realized how much I had missed this connection. Slowly but surely, the walls Sarah had built around me began to crumble. My world expanded beyond the confines of our marriage, and I embraced every opportunity to reconnect with the people who truly mattered. As the months turned into a year, I found myself stepping into uncharted territory dating. It wasn't something I rushed into, in fact. The thought initially terrified me. The wounds from my marriage were still healing, and I wasn't sure if I could trust anyone again. But after some encouragement from friends and a lot of introspection, I decided to give it a try. My first few dates were awkward. Conversations felt forced, and I struggled to open up. But one evening I met Emily. She wasn't flashy or overly dramatic, she was kind, funny, and refreshingly honest. We bonded over our mutual love of hiking, and a shared disdain for reality TV. Most importantly, she respected my pace and didn't push me to move faster than I was ready. Emily taught me that trust could be rebuilt, slowly but surely. She reminded me that one person's betrayal didn't define everyone else. As we spent more time together, I began to let my guard down, realizing that life didn't have to be about dwelling on the past. It could be about building something new, one small step at a time. Standing on my porch one evening, I looked out at the sunset and felt a profound sense of peace. The chaos of the past was finally behind me, replaced by a life that felt simpler, but infinitely more fulfilling. The divorce, the betrayal, and the court battles had been painful chapters, but they had also shaped me into someone stronger. My career was thriving, my relationships were deeper, and I had a newfound appreciation for the quiet joys of life. Whether it was a weekend hike with Emily, a family dinner, or just an evening spent reading on the couch, I had learned to cherish the moments that truly mattered. Looking back, I realized that Sarah had taken many things from me: trust, time, and a sense of security. But she hadn't taken my ability to rebuild, and as the light of the setting sun bathed my home in warmth, I knew with certainty that this was my life, reclaimed and renewed,